The gunshot that killed Hannah Jenkins's horse was meant for him, and everyone in Animas Forks, Colorado knew it. Sarah Crawford heard the news while sitting at her workbench, threading a needle through the torn leather of a saddle bag. The year was 1878, and the mining town nestled high in the San Juan Mountains had seen its share of violence. But something about this particular incident made her hands still over her work. Through the open window of her small repair shop, she could hear the commotion as men carried the wounded cowboy to Doc Peterson's place 2 buildings down. The horse, they said, had taken a bullet to the neck and dropped like a stone, throwing its rider hard against the rocky ground. She set down her needle and walked to the window, watching as 4 men struggled with a stretcher. The man on it was unconscious, his dark hair matted with blood, one arm hanging limp over the side. Sarah's fingers twitched with the familiar urge to fix what was broken, to mend what was torn. It was all she had ever known how to do. Her father had taught her the trade before consumption took him 3 years ago. Thomas Crawford had been the best leather worker and general repairman in 3 counties, able to fix anything from a torn harness to a broken pocket watch. Sarah had inherited his skill and his shop, and at 22 years old, she had made a name for herself as someone who could mend just about anything. Folks brought her their torn clothing, their broken furniture, their damaged tack. She fixed it all with steady hands and an eye for detail that her father would have been proud of. But she had never tried to mend a man's spirit, and from what she could see of Hannah Jenkins through that window, his spirit was going to need more mending than his body. 3 days passed before she saw him again. Sarah was working on a complicated repair to a music box that belonged to Martha Henderson, the postmaster's wife, when the shop door opened. She looked up to find a tall man standing in the doorway, favoring his left side, his right arm bound tight against his chest with a sling. His face was bruised, a deep purple spreading from his temple down to his jaw, and his dark eyes held a hollowness that made Sarah's chest tighten. "Are you the woman who fixes things?" His voice was rough, like he had been shouting or maybe not speaking at all for days. "I am." Sarah set down the delicate music box mechanism carefully. "Sarah Crawford, Hannah Jenkins." He took a step inside, moving slowly, and Sarah could see the pain in the tight line of his mouth. "They call me Hank. I heard about what happened. I am sorry about your horse." Something flickered across his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. Blackjack was a good animal. 14 years I had him. He cleared his throat, looking around the shop as if trying to find the right words. "I have a saddle that needs mending. Got torn up pretty bad in the fall." Sarah nodded, though she suspected the saddle was not the real reason he was here. There was something in his eyes, a desperate kind of searching that she recognized because she had seen it in the mirror after her father died. "Let me take a look at it." Hank stepped back outside and returned carrying a saddle that had indeed seen better days. The leather was scuffed and torn in several places, one stirrup hanging by a thread, the horn cracked down the middle. He set it on her workbench with a grunt of effort, his jaw clenching. "You should not be carrying that with your ribs injured," Sarah said, moving around the bench to examine the damage. Doc said 3 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder that he popped back in. "I will live." The words were matter of fact, but there was an undercurrent of something darker there. Like maybe he was not entirely sure he wanted to. Sarah ran her fingers over the torn leather, assessing what could be salvaged and what would need to be replaced. "This is going to take some time. The horn especially. I might need to reinforce it with metal." "Take all the time you need." "I am not going anywhere." Hank looked out the window at the street beyond, where afternoon sunlight painted the false-fronted buildings gold. Got nowhere else to be now. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something told her not to push. Instead, she said, "It will be ready in a week. Maybe less if I do not get too many other jobs coming in." He nodded once, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "They say you can fix anything. I do my best. Even things that do not seem fixable." Sarah met his eyes and saw the real question there. "I promised my father I would always try. I have not broken that promise yet." Hank studied her for a long moment, and she had the sense of being weighed, measured, found either wanting or worthy. She could not tell which. Then he nodded again and left, the door closing softly behind him. That evening, Sarah worked late in her shop, the oil lamp casting long shadows across her workbench. She had taken apart the saddle horn and was carefully shaping a thin piece of metal to reinforce it when Martha Henderson stopped by with fresh bread and gossip. "I saw Hank Jenkins come by earlier," Martha said, setting the bread on the corner of the bench that Sarah kept clear for such gifts. The people of Animas Forks often paid in trade, and Sarah's larder was always full because of it. "How did he seem?" "Injured. Quiet." Sarah did not look up from her work. "I suppose he told you what happened." "Just that someone shot his horse." Martha made a tusking sound. "It was those cattle rustlers that have been working the area. Hank was riding guard on a herd coming through the pass when they struck. Killed 2 men, took nearly 100 head of cattle. Hank gave chase and they shot Blackjack right out from under him. He fell 30 feet down a ravine. Doc says it is a miracle he survived at all." Sarah's hands stilled. "He chased them alone. That is Hank. He has been trail boss for the Triple Cross Ranch for 8 years now. Loyal to a fault, some would say. Takes everything personal. This hit him harder than most things. I heard he blamed himself for the 2 men who died. Said he should have posted more guards, should have been more careful. It was not his fault. Try telling him that. He has barely spoken to anyone since it happened. Just sits in his room at the boarding house, staring at the walls. Mrs. Cooper says she has to force him to eat." Martha leaned against the workbench, her expression troubled. "That man has seen too much, I think. This was just the thing that finally broke something inside him." After Martha left, Sarah sat for a long time holding the piece of metal she had been shaping, thinking about broken things and whether all of them could truly be fixed. Her father used to say that everything broken wanted to be whole again, that you just had to find the right way to put the pieces back together. But he had been talking about leather and wood and metal, not human hearts. Still, when she finally went upstairs to her small apartment above the shop, she found herself thinking about Hank Jenkins and the hollow look in his eyes. She had promised she could mend anything. Maybe it was time to find out if that was really true. The next morning, Sarah woke early and spent an hour baking biscuits with the last of the dried berries she had put up the summer before. She packed them in a small basket with a jar of honey and walked down to Mrs. Cooper's boarding house just as the sun was cresting the peaks to the east. The air was thin and cold at this elevation, even in July, and Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she knocked on the door. Mrs. Cooper answered with flour on her hands and surprise on her face. "Sarah Crawford, what brings you by so early?" "I brought something for Mr. Jenkins. I heard he has not been eating well." Understanding softened Mrs. Cooper's weathered features. "That is kind of you, dear. He is in room 4 upstairs. Fair warning, though, he is not much for company." Sarah climbed the narrow stairs, her heart beating faster than the exertion warranted. She told herself it was just charity, just being neighborly, but there was something else too. A pull she could not quite explain toward the broken man who had walked into her shop yesterday. She knocked on door 4, no answer. She knocked again, louder this time. "Go away." The voice from inside was muffled, tired. "I brought you breakfast." A long silence, then footsteps. The door opened just wide enough for Hank to look out, and Sarah was struck again by how different he seemed from the confident trail Boss Martha had described. He was unshaven, his hair uncombed, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "I am not hungry. When was the last time you ate?" "I do not remember. Does not matter." Sarah felt a flare of frustration. "It matters. You are injured and you need food to heal." "Maybe I do not want to heal." He started to close the door, but Sarah stuck her foot in the gap. "That is too bad, because I spent an hour making these biscuits, and I am not leaving until you eat at least one." She surprised herself with the firmness in her voice, but something about his self-destructive resignation made her angry. Her father had fought for every breath at the end, desperate to stay in a world that was taking him away piece by piece. This man who had survived a fall that should have killed him was just giving up. Hank stared at her, something flickering behind the hollowness in his eyes. Then, to her surprise, his mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You are stubborn. I have been told that before." He opened the door wider and stepped back. "Come in then, before Mrs. Cooper starts gossiping about you visiting my room." The room was small and neat, the bed made with military precision despite his injuries. A single window looked out over the main street, and Sarah could see her shop from here, the sign her father had painted still hanging above the door. Hank sat carefully on the edge of the bed while Sarah pulled the room's only chair closer and set the basket on the small table between them. "I do not have any plates," he said. "We can use the napkins." She unwrapped a biscuit and handed it to him with the honey jar. "Eat." He took it, and she watched as he bit into it slowly, mechanically, like eating was just another chore to get through. But after the first bite, something changed. He took another, then another, and before she knew it, he had finished the biscuit and was reaching for a second. "These are good," he said, and there was surprise in his voice, as if he had forgotten that things could taste good, that there was still pleasure to be found in simple acts. "My mother's recipe. She died when I was 12, but I remember her making them every Sunday." They sat in silence while he ate 3 more biscuits, and Sarah found herself studying him in the morning light. He was probably 30 or so, though it was hard to tell with the bruising and the weariness that seemed to age him. His hands were scarred from years of rope work, his skin weathered from days in the sun. But there was something in the set of his shoulders, even slumped as they were now, that spoke of strength. Of a man who had carried weight for a long time and was finally buckling under it. "Why are you really here?" he asked finally, setting down the half-eaten biscuit. "You do not know me. I know you are hurting. I know what it is like to lose something important." Sarah folded her hands in her lap. "When my father died, I stopped fixing things for almost a month. Could not bring myself to touch his tools, could not stand to be in the shop. It felt wrong to make things whole when the most important thing in my life was broken beyond repair." "What changed?" Martha Henderson brought me her daughter's doll. The arm had torn clean off, and little Emma was heartbroken. Martha asked if I could fix it, and I said no, said I could not fix anything anymore. But then Emma came to the shop herself, this tiny 6-year-old girl, and she looked at me with these big eyes and said, "But you promised you could mend anything." That is what my mama says, that Sarah Crawford keeps her promises. Sarah smiled at the memory, so I fixed the doll. And then I fixed the next thing, and the next, and eventually I realized that just because one thing was broken beyond my ability to repair did not mean I should stop trying to fix everything else. Hank was quiet for a long time, turning the honey jar in his hands. "Those men died because I made bad choices. I was responsible for them, and I failed. Or they died because rustlers are murderers and thieves, and sometimes bad things happen no matter how careful we are. I should have been more careful, maybe." Or maybe you did everything right and it still went wrong, because that is how life works sometimes. Sarah leaned forward. Beating yourself up is not going to bring them back, but giving up, letting yourself waste away, that is not honoring their memory either. He looked up at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah saw the war happening behind his eyes. The part that wanted to surrender to the guilt and pain, and the part that was not quite ready to stop fighting. You do not know what you are asking. I am not asking anything. I am just saying that if you decide you want to be whole again, if you decide you want to mend what is broken inside you, I will be here. Same as I am here for everyone else who brings me their broken things. Hank's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he could not quite swallow. Finally, he said, I do not know if I can be fixed. Then it is a good thing I promised I could mend anything. Sarah stood and picked up the basket, leaving the remaining biscuits on the table. Your saddle will be ready in a few days. Come by the shop when you are feeling up to it. She was at the door when he spoke again. Sarah. She turned back. Thank you for the biscuits, for coming here, she smiled. You are welcome, Hank Jenkins. Over the next 3 days, Sarah threw herself into repairing the saddle with a focus that bordered on obsessive. She replaced the torn leather with pieces from her carefully hoarded stock, reinforced the cracked horn with brass fittings that she shaped and polished until they gleamed, restitched every seam with waxed thread that would hold through years of hard use. It was some of her best work, and she knew it, but it was not just the saddle she was working on. Each morning, she woke early and brought breakfast to room 4 at Mrs. Cooper's boarding house. Sometimes it was biscuits, sometimes cornbread or eggs or leftover stew. Hank always let her in, and they would sit in that small room and talk while he ate. At first, the conversations were stilted, awkward. Hank was not used to talking about himself, and Sarah was not used to pushing. But gradually, piece by piece, he began to open up. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his parents who had died of fever when he was 17. He told her about drifting north, working various ranches, until he had landed at the Triple Cross 8 years ago and found something like home. The owner, Mr. Patterson, he is a good man, Hank said one morning, staring out the window at the mountains beyond. Gave me a chance when I was just a head-headed kid who thought he knew everything, taught me what it meant to be responsible for something bigger than myself. His voice went rough. That is why this hurts so much. I let him down, let everyone down. Did he say that? No. He came to see me in the hospital, told me it was not my fault, told me to take all the time I needed, but I could see it in his eyes. The disappointment. Or maybe you saw your own disappointment reflected back and mistook it for his. Sarah set down her coffee cup. Have you been to see him since you got out? Hank shook his head. Can't face him. Can't or will not. He looked at her sharply, but there was no heat in it. You do not pull punches, do you? My father used to say that sometimes the best way to fix something is to face the damage head on, not dance around it. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Hiding in this room is not going to make anything better. What if I go out there and confirm that everyone thinks I am a failure? What if you go out there and find out they do not? The next day, Hank did not answer when Sarah knocked. She felt a moment of panic, wondering if he had left town or done something worse, but Mrs. Cooper assured her he had gone out early that morning, walking stiffly but deliberately toward the edge of town, where the Triple Cross Ranch lay 5 miles down the valley. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but she found herself glancing out the window every few minutes, watching for his return. It was nearly dinner time when she finally saw him walking up the main street, and she did not even pretend not to be watching as he made his way directly to her shop. The door opened and Hank stepped inside, and Sarah felt her heart lift at what she saw. He was still bruised, still moving carefully, but there was something different in the way he carried himself. The hollowness in his eyes had lessened, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. "I went to see Mr. Patterson," he said without preamble, and you were right. He does not blame me, none of them do. They are just glad I am alive." Hank moved closer to the workbench where his saddle sat, nearly finished now. "He said something I did not expect, though. Said one of the rustlers got caught 3 counties over, and under questioning, he admitted they had been planning that raid for weeks. They knew the herd was coming, knew the route, had it all worked out. Said no amount of guards would have stopped them. They would have just waited for a better opportunity." Sarah felt relief wash through her. "So it truly was not your fault." "I guess not, or at least not as much as I thought." He ran his hand over the saddle, tracing the new stitching. "This is beautiful work. It is almost done. Another day or two. No hurry. Like I said, I am not going anywhere." He looked up at her, and Sarah felt something shift in the air between them, a charge like electricity before a summer storm. "Sarah, I want to ask you something." "All right. Would you let me take you to dinner?" "As a thank you for everything you have done." Her heart skipped. "You do not have to thank me." "I know I do not have to. I want to." He seemed nervous now, uncertain in a way that was somehow endearing. "Unless you would rather not. I would understand if you would rather not." "I would like that very much," Sarah said, and the smile that broke across Hank's face was like watching the sun rise over the mountains. They ate at the small restaurant attached to the hotel, a place with checkered tablecloths and candles in bottles and food that was surprisingly good considering Animas Forks was a mining town barely 10 years old. Hank had cleaned up, shaved, changed into clothes that did not look slept in, and Sarah had worn her best dress, the blue one with lace at the collar that her father had bought her for her 20th birthday. Conversation came easier now, flowing like water over stones. They talked about everything and nothing. Hank told her about trailing cattle across open country, about nights sleeping under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt, about the satisfaction of getting a herd safely to market. Sarah told him about learning her father's trade, about the puzzle of figuring out how broken things fit back together, about the quiet joy of handing someone their repaired treasure and seeing their face light up. "You really love it," Hank observed, watching her talk. "The fixing." "I do. There is something about taking something broken and making it whole again. It feels like setting the world right, even in just a small way." "Is that what you are doing with me, setting me right?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "No, I think you are setting yourself right. I am just helping hold the pieces together while you do." Hank reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "I was in a dark place when I walked into your shop, darker than I have ever been. If you had not pushed your way into my room with those biscuits, I do not know where I would be right now. You would have found your way back. You are stronger than you think. Maybe, but it would have taken a lot longer and been a lot harder." He squeezed her hand. "You told me you promised you could mend anything. I did not believe it at first, but I am starting to think you might be right." They walked back through the town as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. The air was cooling rapidly, the way it did in the mountains, and when Sarah shivered, Hank shrugged out of his jacket and draped it around her shoulders despite her protests about his ribs. "They are healing fine," he insisted. "Doc said I am recovering faster than expected. Good food and good company must be helping." At the door to her shop, they stood facing each other, neither quite ready to say goodnight. Sarah could feel her heart beating against her ribs, could see her own nervous excitement reflected in Hank's eyes. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Not just when you finish the saddle, really see you." "I would like that." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Sarah did not want to. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, she felt something in her chest crack open, something she had kept locked away since her father died. The fear of caring about someone, of letting them matter, of risking the pain of loss again. But as Hank's hand came up to cup her cheek, as she leaned into the kiss and let herself feel the warmth of his touch, Sarah decided that some risks were worth taking. The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness that Sarah had not thought possible. Hank came by the shop every day, sometimes with excuses about needing something repaired, sometimes just to sit and watch her work while they talked. He was recovering steadily, his bruises fading from purple to yellow to gone, his ribs healing until he could move without wincing. But more than his body was mending. Sarah watched as the darkness that had haunted his eyes gradually lifted, replaced by a light that made him look years younger. He started smiling more, laughing even, and the sound of his laughter became Sarah's favorite thing in the world. He introduced her to Mr. Patterson, who rode into town specifically to meet the woman who had pulled his trail boss back from the edge. Patterson was in his 50s, weathered and kind, and he took Sarah aside at one point and said, "Whatever you did for that boy, I am grateful. He is like a son to me, and I was worried I was going to lose him after the raid. But he is himself again. Better than himself, maybe." Sarah also met some of the other Triple Cross ranch hands, men who clearly respected and liked Hank, who welcomed Sarah into their circle with easy acceptance. She learned that Hank was known for being fair but tough, for never asking his men to do anything he would not do himself, for taking care of those under his charge with a loyalty that bordered on fierce. He blamed himself when Pete and Charlie died, one of the hands told her quietly. Took it harder than anyone, but that is Hank. He feels things deep, even when he pretends he does not. Sarah was learning that about him. Beneath the tough cowboy exterior was a man who felt everything with an intensity that could be overwhelming. He had just gotten good at hiding it, at locking it away where it could not hurt him. The raid and the loss of his men and his horse had cracked that armor, and instead of dealing with the pain, he had tried to shut down completely. But now, with Sarah's help, he was learning a different way. Learning that feeling pain did not mean drowning in it, that acknowledging hurt did not make you weak, that letting someone help you carry the weight made it easier to bear. One afternoon, Hank came by the shop with a package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you," he said, looking almost shy. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and took the package, curious. Inside was a leather journal beautifully made with her initials tooled into the cover in an intricate design. "Hank, this is beautiful. Where did you get it?" "I made it." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, I had help from the leatherworker over in Silverton, but I did the design and the tooling myself. Figured since you taught me that broken things can be fixed, maybe I could learn to make something whole from the start." Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched beyond words. "This is incredible. I had no idea you could do this. My father taught me some basics when I was a kid. I have not done it in years, but I remembered enough. Thought maybe you could use it to keep track of your repairs or for whatever you want." He watched her anxiously. "Do you like it?" Instead of answering, Sarah set the journal down carefully and pulled him into a kiss that said everything words could not. When they broke apart, Hank was grinning. "I will take that as a yes. I love it. I love that you made it yourself." She picked up the journal again, admiring the craftsmanship. "You have a real talent for this. Maybe you could teach me more. I could help out around the shop, learn the trade properly. I have been thinking about what comes next, and I do not know if I want to keep trailing cattle forever. It is hard work, and I am not getting any younger." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would love to teach you. They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Hank would come to the shop in the mornings and work alongside Sarah, learning the intricacies of leather repair, of stitching and tooling and dyeing. He had good hands for it, steady and patient, and he listened carefully to her instructions. In the afternoons, they would often take walks through the surrounding mountains, following trails that wound between the peaks, talking about everything under the sun. It was on one of these walks, as summer was beginning to turn toward autumn, and the aspens were thinking about changing color, that Hank told Sarah about his horse. "I got Blackjack when he was 2 and I was 16, he said, his hand warm in Sarah's as they navigated a rocky section of trail. He was half wild, barely broke, and everyone said he was too mean to be worth the trouble, but I saw something in him, a spirit that just needed someone to understand it, not break it." "Sounds familiar," Sarah said quietly. Hank glanced at her and smiled. "Yeah, I guess it does. Anyway, I worked with him for months, patient like my father taught me, and eventually we came to an understanding. He was the best cow pony I ever had, smart, quick, and loyal. He saved my life more than once over the years. That is why it hurt so much when he died. That is part of it. But it was also that he died because of me, because of decisions I made." Hank stopped walking and turned to face her. "I have been thinking a lot about that day, about the raid, and I realize now that I was carrying around guilt that did not belong to me. Bad things happened and people I cared about got hurt or died, but it was not my fault, not really. That is a hard lesson to learn. I could not have learned it without you." He cupped her face in his hands, his brown eyes serious. "You did not just mend my saddle, Sarah. You helped me mend something inside myself that I thought was broken forever. You showed me that it is okay to hurt, that it is okay to need help, that letting someone in does not make me weak." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "You did that yourself, Hank." "I just held up a mirror so you could see what I saw." "And what did you see?" "A good man who had forgotten he was good. A strong man who thought he had to be strong alone. A man worth saving." Hank kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Sarah felt the last pieces of her own broken places knit together. She had spent 3 years focusing on fixing things for other people, on keeping her promise to her father, but she had not realized how much of herself needed mending too. How much she had closed off after her father's death, how much she had been just going through the motions of living without really letting herself feel. Hank had changed that. His brokenness had called to her brokenness, and in helping him heal, she had healed too. They had mended each other. "I love you," Hank said against her lips, the words almost a whisper. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, but I love you, Sarah Crawford. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." "I love you too," Sarah said, and felt joy burst through her like sunlight. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Good scared or bad scared. Good scared. The kind that means something matters." They stood on that mountain trail as the afternoon sun painted everything gold, holding each other and making promises without words. When they finally headed back down toward town, Sarah felt like everything in her life had been leading to this moment, to this man, to this love that had grown out of broken things made whole. That evening, Hank asked Sarah to have dinner with him and Mr. Patterson at the hotel. She agreed, puzzled by his nervous excitement, and arrived to find Patterson already seated with a bottle of wine on the table and a knowing smile on his weathered face. "Miss Crawford, good to see you," Patterson said, standing to pull out her chair. "Please call me Sarah." "All right then, Sarah. And you call me Robert." He poured wine for all 3 of them, then lifted his glass. "I am going to cut right to it because I am too old for dancing around things. Hank here tells me he has been learning the repair trade from you." Sarah glanced at Hank, who was looking studiously at his wine glass. He has been helping out in the shop, yes. He is quite good at leather work. That does not surprise me. The boy has always been good with his hands. Robert leaned back in his chair. He also tells me he is thinking about settling down in Animas Forks permanent-like. That true, Hank? Yes, sir, Hank said quietly. Well then. Robert's smile widened. I suppose you will not be needing your job as trail boss anymore. Hank looked up sharply. Sir, I did not mean to leave you in the lurch. I can finish out the season, help you find a replacement. Already found one. Young fellow named Marcus, been working as my assistant foreman. He is ready for more responsibility. Robert turned to Sarah. Which brings me to my real reason for this dinner. I own the building your shop is in, Sarah. Your father and I had an arrangement where he paid rent by doing repair work for the ranch, and I assumed that arrangement would continue with you. It has, Sarah said carefully, not sure where this was going. Well, I would like to propose something different. I have been thinking about expanding my operation, maybe getting into breeding horses more seriously. Good quality tack is essential for that, and having a reliable repair person even more so. What would you say to taking on exclusive work for the Triple Cross? All our repairs, custom saddles for the breeding operation, the works. In exchange, I will deed you the building outright and pay a fair rate for the work. Sarah felt her breath catch. Owning the building would mean security, stability, no more worrying about rent or leases. But exclusive work also meant less time for other customers. That is a generous offer, Robert, but what about the folks in town who depend on me for repairs? That is the beauty of my plan. You train up an assistant who can handle the town work while you focus on the ranch contracts. Robert glanced at Hank. I was thinking maybe a certain former trail boss might be interested in that assistant position. Understanding dawned, and Sarah looked at Hank with wide eyes. You planned this. I might have talked to Robert about possibilities, Hank admitted, but only if you are interested. I would never presume to make decisions about your business without you. Sarah's mind was racing. It was a perfect solution, really. Steady income, ownership of the building, the chance to expand her business and teach Hank the trade properly. And it meant Hank would be staying in Animas Forks, would be working beside her every day, would be part of her life in a permanent way. There is one condition, Robert said, his eyes twinkling. You have to let me give you away at the wedding. Sarah felt her cheeks heat. We are not engaged. Yet, Hank said softly, and when Sarah met his eyes, she saw her whole future reflected there. She turned back to Robert, her heart full to bursting. I accept your offer, all of it. Robert's laugh boomed through the restaurant. Excellent, now let us eat and plan this thing properly. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a crisp October afternoon when the aspens had turned the mountains to gold. It was a small affair, held in the church at the edge of town, with most of Animas Forks in attendance. Sarah wore a simple white dress that Martha Henderson had helped her sew, with lace from her mother's wedding gown sewn into the bodice. Hank wore a new suit, looking handsome and nervous, and so full of love that Sarah felt tears threaten every time she looked at him. Robert Patterson did indeed give her away, walking her down the aisle with the solemnity of a proud father. Doc Peterson stood up as Hank's best man, and Martha Henderson as Sarah's matron of honor. The ceremony was short and sweet, the minister speaking about love and commitment and the joy of two broken people finding wholeness in each other. When Hank slipped the simple gold band onto Sarah's finger, his hand was shaking. With this ring, I promise to love you and cherish you for all my days. You saved my life, Sarah. You gave me a reason to keep going when I thought I had none. I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift. Sarah's voice was thick with tears when she said her own vows. With this ring, I promise to walk beside you through whatever life brings. You taught me that some broken things cannot be fixed with needle and thread, that sometimes what is needed is patience and love and the courage to hold on. I will hold on to you, Hank Jenkins, today and always." The kiss that sealed their vows was witnessed by the whole town, and the cheer that went up rattled the church windows. At the reception in the hotel dining room, there was music and dancing and more food than Sarah had seen in one place since her father's funeral. But this was a celebration of life and love, not a mourning of death, and Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. "Are you happy?" Hank asked as they danced, his arms strong around her waist. "Happier than I knew was possible," Sarah said truthfully. "Are you?" "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find out this is all a dream. That I am still lying in a ravine with broken ribs and a dead horse, hallucinating about a beautiful woman who promised she could mend anything." Sarah reached up and touched his face, feeling the reality of his skin under her palm. "Not a dream. Real. All of this is real. Then I am the luckiest man alive." They moved into the apartment above the shop, which they expanded by knocking through to the adjacent vacant room that Robert owned. Hank proved to be surprisingly good at carpentry, and together they built new cabinets and a larger bed and a window seat where Sarah could sit and watch the mountains while she sewed. They painted the walls a warm yellow and hung curtains that Sarah made from fabric Martha helped her pick out in Silverton. The business thrived. True to his word, Robert sent a steady stream of work their way, and Hank proved to be not just good at leatherwork but gifted at it. He had an eye for design that Sarah lacked, and soon he was creating custom pieces that were works of art as much as functional tack. They hired a young man named Tom to handle the simple repairs and town work, which freed up Sarah and Hank to focus on the more complex projects. But the best part was not the business success or the financial security. It was the life they built together, the quiet mornings drinking coffee while they planned out their day's work, the afternoons spent side by side at their workbenches, talking or working in comfortable silence, the evenings walking through town, greeting neighbors, stopping to admire the sunset over the peaks, the nights in their bed, learning each other's bodies, whispering secrets in the dark. Hank still had hard days sometimes. Days when the weight of what had happened seemed to press down on him, when the ghosts of Pete and Charlie and Blackjack haunted his thoughts. But he had learned to talk about it now, to let Sarah in instead of shutting her out. And Sarah had learned to sit with him in the darkness, not trying to fix everything with words, just being present until the light found its way back in. Spring came again to Animas Forks, the snow melting from the high peaks and the wildflowers beginning to bloom. Sarah discovered she was pregnant on a morning in late May, and the joy on Hank's face when she told him made her cry. "A baby," he said wonderingly, his hand splayed across her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled her close, careful and tender. "I thought my life was over last year, thought I had nothing left to live for, and now I have everything. A wife I adore, a business I love, and a baby on the way. You did that, Sarah. You gave me all of this." "We gave it to each other," she corrected gently. "You taught me how to live again too, remember? How to open my heart after I thought I had closed it forever." Their son was born on a snowy January morning in 1880, arriving early and in a hurry like he could not wait to see the world. They named him Thomas, after Sarah's father, and Robert, after the man who had given them their chance. He had Hank's dark hair and Sarah's blue eyes and lungs that could wake the dead when he was hungry. Hank took to fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He was up with Sarah for every midnight feeding, changing diapers with the same careful attention he brought to his leatherwork. talking to Thomas in a soft voice about horses and mountains, and the mother who had saved both of them. Watching him with their son, Sarah fell in love with him all over again. The years rolled by like a river, each one bringing changes and challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved helping in the shop, his small hands learning to stitch leather under his father's patient tutelage. They added a daughter 3 years later, a fierce little thing they named Clara Marie, who had her father's stubbornness and her mother's determination to fix everything. The business expanded beyond anything Sarah had dreamed. They hired more assistants, took on apprentices, and eventually opened a second location in Silverton with Tom as the manager. Hank's custom saddles became famous throughout Colorado, sought after by wealthy ranchers and rodeo riders alike. But they never forgot their roots, always making time for the simple repairs that the townspeople of Animas Forks needed. Robert Patterson became a fixture in their lives, a grandfather in all but blood to their children. He taught Thomas to ride and told Clara stories about her father's days as a trail boss. When he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, the whole town mourned, but none more than Hank and Sarah, who owed him so much. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hank took Sarah back to the trail where he had first told her he loved her. The children were staying with Martha Henderson for the night, and they had the whole afternoon to themselves. They walked hand in hand, older now, weathered by life and work and parenthood, but still so deeply in love that Sarah sometimes felt her heart might burst with it. "You remember what I told you here?" Hank asked when they reached the spot, marked by a distinctive lightning-struck pine that they had carved their initials into years ago. "You told me I was the best thing that ever happened to you." "I did, and it is still true, more so now than ever." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You promised you could mend anything, Sarah, and you did. You mended my broken spirit when I had given up on ever being whole again. But more than that, you taught me what it means to truly live. Not just survive, not just get through the days, but really live with an open heart and the courage to feel everything, even when it hurts." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "You taught me the same thing. Before you walked into my shop that day, I was just going through the motions. Fixing things for other people but not fixing myself. You showed me that letting someone in is not a weakness, that love is worth the risk of loss, that broken things can become even stronger when they are mended with care." "We saved each other," Hank said softly. "We did." He pulled her close, and they stood there on that mountainside as the afternoon sun painted everything gold, holding each other the way they had 10 years ago and would 10 years from now and every day in between. Around them, the aspens whispered in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out as it rode the thermals. Sarah thought about the girl she had been, sitting alone in her father's shop, convinced that the only way to honor his memory was to close off her heart and focus solely on her work. She thought about the broken man who had walked through her door with a damaged saddle and a damaged soul, both in desperate need of mending. She thought about the promise she had made to her father to try to fix everything that came her way, and how that promise had led her to the greatest gift of her life. Some things, she had learned, cannot be mended with needle and thread. Some things require patience and time and the willingness to sit with discomfort while healing happens. Some things need love and understanding, and the courage to believe that wholeness is possible even when everything feels irreparably broken. But all things, she had discovered, all broken and damaged and hurting things want to be whole again. They just need someone willing to hold the pieces together while they figure out how to mend themselves. "What are you thinking about?" Hank asked, pulling back to look at her face. Sarah smiled up at her husband, this man who had led her into his darkness and trusted her to help him find the light. I am thinking about promises kept and broken things mended. I am thinking about how grateful I am that you walked into my shop that day. I am the grateful one. We both are, Sarah said. We both are. They walked back down the mountain as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Tomorrow they would return to their work, to the steady rhythm of their days, to the beautiful ordinary life they had built together. Their children would clamor for attention. Customers would arrive with things needing repair. The endless demands of running a business would press in. But tonight, they had this moment. This walk down a mountain trail in the fading light, hands clasped, hearts whole. Two people who had found each other when they both needed finding, who had mended each other when mending seemed impossible. Sarah Crawford had promised she could mend anything, and Hank Jenkins had let her mend his broken spirit. But the truth, the beautiful, complicated truth, was that they had mended each other. And in doing so, they had created something that could never be broken, a love that would last all their days. Years continued to pass in Animas Forks, the small mining town growing and changing as the ore veins ran thin, and people began to drift away to more prosperous locations. But Hank and Sarah stayed, their business adapting to serve the ranchers and travelers who still needed their services. Their children grew strong and capable, Thomas eventually taking over much of the custom work while Clara surprised everyone by showing a talent for metalwork and beginning to craft spurs and buckles to complement the leather goods. They added a third child late, a surprise daughter born when Sarah was 40 and Hank 42. They named her Hope because that was what she represented, the ongoing promise that broken things could heal, that life continued to offer gifts even when you thought you had received all you were due, that love could keep growing and deepening year after year. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their grown children and a handful of grandchildren, Hank stood up at the celebration dinner and raised his glass. 25 years ago, I walked into a small repair shop carrying a damaged saddle and a more damaged soul. The woman behind the workbench looked at me and promised she could mend anything. I did not believe her then. I thought some things were too broken to be fixed, but I was wrong. He looked at Sarah, his dark eyes still capable of making her heart race after all these years. You showed me that with patience and love and the courage to try, anything can be mended. You took a man who had given up on himself and helped him find his way back. You gave me a life beyond anything I dared dream of. So here is to you, Sarah Jenkins, to the woman who keeps her promises. To my wife, my partner, my heart. I love you more today than the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Sarah stood and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist while their family applauded. You made it easy to keep that promise, she said against his chest. You did the hard work of healing, Hank. I just held your hand while you did it. We held each other's hands, he corrected, tilting her face up to kiss her softly. We still do, and they did for many years more, their hands growing weathered and spotted with age but never letting go. They worked side by side until they were too old to work anymore, then handed the business fully over to Thomas and Clara, and spent their days walking the mountain trails they had always loved, talking and laughing and remembering. When Hank died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Sarah grieved deeply but not desperately. She knew she had been blessed beyond measure with their life together, with the years they had shared, with the family they had built. She knew that the broken cowboy who had walked into her shop so many decades ago had been given a full and happy life, that his spirit had been not just mended, but made stronger than it had ever been before. She lived 3 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, still keeping her hand in at the shop occasionally when a particularly tricky repair came in. She told stories about the old days, about Animas Forks in its mining heyday, about the grandfather the younger children had never known, about the power of believing that broken things could be made whole. On a crisp October morning, with the aspens turning gold the way they had on her wedding day, Sarah Crawford Jenkins passed peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her weathered face. Her family buried her beside Hank on a hillside overlooking the town they had called home, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names, their dates, and a single line that Thomas had chosen. They mended each other. The repair shop continued for 2 more generations, a fixture in Animas Forks even as the town shrank to just a handful of hardy souls who refused to leave their mountain home. The sign that Thomas Crawford had painted so long ago eventually weathered away, replaced by a newer one that read Jenkins and Sons, fine leather goods and repairs. But the spirit of the place remained the same. People still brought their broken things there, and the Jenkins family still fixed them with the same care and attention that Sarah had learned from her father and taught to her husband and passed down to her children. They fixed saddles and harnesses, boots and bags, all the leather goods that frontier life demanded. But more than that, they listened. They offered coffee and conversation. They sat with people's pain and did not try to rush them through it. They understood, because their family's story had taught them, that sometimes what people really needed was not just their possessions repaired, but their spirits mended. The story of Sarah and Hank became legend in the area, passed down through families, embellished and romanticized as all old stories are. But the heart of it remained true. A woman who promised she could mend anything, a broken cowboy who let her try, and the love that bloomed between them as they discovered that the best mending is done not with needle and thread but with patience, compassion, and the courage to believe in healing. Their descendants still lived in Colorado, scattered across the state, but gathering every few years at the old shop in Animas Forks, now a ghost town, but preserved as a historical site. They would walk the mountain trails their ancestors had loved, visit the graves on the hillside, tell their children about the great-great-grandparents who had started it all. And sometimes, when the aspens were gold and the air had that crisp October bite, they swore they could feel something in the air. A presence, a warmth, a sense of 2 spirits still walking those trails hand in hand, still mending each other, still whole, still in love. Because that was the real magic of Sarah and Hank's story. Not that she had mended his broken spirit, though she had helped. Not that he had healed her closed-off heart, though he had. The magic was that they had found each other when they both needed finding, that they had recognized brokenness in each other and said, "Here, let me hold those pieces for you while you figure out how they fit back together." The magic was in the promise kept, the faith maintained, the belief that nothing is ever so broken that it cannot be made whole again with enough love and patience and time. And in a small shop in a Colorado ghost town, where the wind whistles through empty buildings and the aspens turn gold every autumn, that magic lives on still. A testament to 2 people who proved that the best things in life are often mended from broken pieces, and that the strongest love grows from the cracks where the light gets in.